coming tonight, making it out here, taking the effort to do that. My name is Benson Berrigan, and I am the president of MU Normal. And MU Normal also works with MU SSDP, which is the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And we both work together on campus and kind of do that. And tonight we have a very special event. We have Allison Holcomb and Neil Franklin here, both deliver speeches. And we're going to start off tonight with Neil. So just to give you guys a little background information on Mr. Franklin. He is a 33-year police veteran who led multi-jurisdictional anti-narcotics task force for the Maryland State Police, and he's also ran training for the Baltimore Police Department. During his time with the Maryland State Department, the Maryland State Police, he held the position of Commander of Education and Training Division, and also the Bureau of Drug and Criminal Enforcement. Neil's firsthand experience in enforcing drug laws has changed his perspective of the war on drugs, and he now focuses on working to change these laws that cause so much harm but do nothing to reduce drug use. Neil is also the executive director for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, also known as LEAP. And Neil's expertise in law enforcement makes him one of the most influential speakers in drug law reform. And without further ado, Mr. Franklin.
I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here. I hope I did it right. Old people can work technology. So, I'm the executive director for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, known to many as LEAP. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is an international nonprofit organization, educational 501c3. We are made up of law enforcement professionals. Many of us are retired. So we're talking about police, we're talking about judges, we're talking about criminal prosecutors, federal agents, prison wardens, parole and probation. From first contact with the police at the moment of arrest, through the courts, through prison, all the way to parole and probation. That's who we are. These are some pictures of some of our speakers. We have folks like Judge Jim Gray, Police Chief Jerry Cameron, one of our co-founders in the upper left, who is Jack Cole. He's a former lieutenant from the New Jersey State Police. He worked undercover for many, many years in some very high-profile cases. Most of us, if not all of us, have spent some time, some more than others, on the front lines of the war on drugs, working the cases, making the arrests, watching those who had been arrested, putting them through the judicial system. We even have Annie Michon over here, who is a whistleblower with MI5, which is the CIA for the UK. So these are just a handful of our thousands of speakers that we have around the globe. Now, most of us came into law enforcement because we wanted to make our communities safer. We wanted to improve public safety. But there's some things that we noticed when we started doing this work. The drug enforcement. That these policies were actually counterproductive to public safety. They made our communities more dangerous. You know, we thought that the initial goals of the so-called war on drugs, you know, that phrase coined by Richard Nixon back in the early 1970s, we thought that the goals were to reduce crime, disease, death, and addiction, and to dramatically reduce the amount of drugs that were coming into our communities, into our neighborhoods. But we soon realized that it wasn't happening. Things were actually getting worse. So we travel around the globe and we speak to this issue. The war on drugs hasn't failed. It was dead on arrival. It never worked. And I think many people knew that it would never work. And why would we know this? Because we had done this once before. We had been here once before. Do any of you remember that time? I know some of you in this audience probably do. Not many, but you're right. Alcohol prohibition of the 1920s. When we had Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. You know what, back then we had running gun battles. We had drive-by shootings. We had people hanging on the side of cars, standing on running boards with machine guns, shooting up our neighborhood. We had children who were being recruited into the bootlegging business. That sounds familiar. It's like many of our communities today, many of our inner cities and some of our small towns where we have open-air drug markets. And we have drug dealers and drug gangs that are ruling, running our communities and many of our streets. And recruiting our children into that deadly game of cat and mouse. So as you heard, I have over 33 years in law enforcement. Most of my career was spent in either criminal or drug enforcement. I worked undercover in 1980. I started with the Maryland State Police in the late 70s. Soon out of the academy, they put me undercover in the Washington, D.C. suburbs of Maryland. Let me tell you something, folks. Most of the cases that I worked, most of the arrests that I made, and I made a lot of arrests, were for nonviolent drug crimes, mostly marijuana. You see, we wanted to make those low-level arrests, put the screws on somebody like you, you know, tighten it up a little bit, wrench it down a little bit, put fear into your heart, you know, because you're going to jail. Jail's it's not a fun place to be, so you're going to have to rat on somebody. You're going to have to tell us who you're getting your weed from. As a matter of fact, we might even get you to do some undercover stuff for us, but not to buy more weed. We'll force you to go buy some cocaine from somewhere, or maybe some heroin or something even worse, and put your life in jeopardy. And that's what we do. And we did it over and over and over and over again. And for what? So I eventually worked my way up through the ranks. I became a lieutenant, and I had 7 multi-jurisdictional task forces in the western part of the state of Maryland. 1 for every county west of the Baltimore metropolitan area. And now I'm responsible for thousands of arrests, as those teams of men and women went out and did the same thing I did when I worked undercover. I continue to move through the agency, becoming a major, and now, in addition to my criminal task forces, because now I have the Northeast region for the state, I had 9 drug task forces. But here's something interesting. When I started working undercover in 1980, we had a very small unit of men and women who worked undercover. Just a handful of us working the entire state. Something else. When I worked undercover, I didn't carry a gun, just like today. No gun, folks. So you can relax. Why? Because the business wasn't as violent back then. Why? Because drug dealers really didn't carry guns back then, not most of them. And if you were caught with a gun, they would highly suspect that you were a police officer. So I didn't. I even went out and worked cases by myself. I had no backup. I had no surveillance team, nobody watching me. If something happened to me, I could disappear, or it would be a week before they find me, or realize that I was missing. But as time went on, now I'm commanding these multi-jurisdictional task forces. Now, a couple decades later, we wouldn't dare send a narc out without backup, without a gun, without a surveillance team, because it had become extremely violent. And that leads me to this point. In December of 1999, I retired from the Maryland State Police. And I was recruited by the Baltimore Police Department to be the commander of training for them, for the training bureau. During this presentation, I'm going to run through my top 10. And the first one is about reducing crime, reducing disease, addiction, death, corruption, refocus police, improve police relationships, defund criminals, save our economy, and restrict kids from having access to this stuff. But that first one, reducing crime, mainly violent crime, that was my reason for making my 180-degree turn. So what exactly do I mean? Just a few months after I started working for the Baltimore Police Department, I had my retirement celebration. The gentleman on the left, his name is Ed Token. He was a very good friend of mine. He was an undercover agent for the Maryland State Police. He was working undercover, at that time, he had worked undercover for about 14 years straight. He was very good at what he did. Just a few months after this picture was taken, Ed Token was telling me about a case he was working. He was assigned to the FBI task force in Washington, D.C. And he was buying cocaine from a mid-level drug dealer, a lot of weight. And he was going to make one more buy of cocaine from this guy. He was going to up it a little bit, up the weight a little bit. They were going to take this guy down, and then they were going to find out who his supplier was and try to work their way up through the network. But this business of drug dealing is all about money. It was all about money back in the 1920s with alcohol. It's all about money today. A lot of money to be made with a little bit of effort over a little bit of time. For some reason, this guy Ed was buying cocaine from, this time he wanted to double his money. So in order to do that, he would have to rip Ed. In order to do that, he would have to keep his drugs and take Ed's money. But in this deadly game of cat and mouse, what does that really mean? What does it mean when you decide to rip off another drug dealer? See, you didn't know Ed was a cop. You thought it was a drug dealer. So what does it mean when one drug dealer is going to rip off another drug dealer? Excuse me? You got to kill him. Why? Because if you don't, he's going to come looking for you. And that's what happened. On October 30th, the year 2000, Tacoma Park, Maryland, when this guy comes back to the car where Ed was sitting, the car that Ed was driving, was wired with video and audio. We had a surveillance team, we had a takedown team. This guy comes back to the car. Without even getting in the car, he reaches over and he shoots Ed Token at point blank range. Pop! Just like that, right in the side of the head, one shot. And killed him. And he got away that night, and we later found him in New York City, hiding in New York City. Ed had a wife and 3 children. And that night, as the hospital filled up with family and other cops, you could hear the chatter about how these cops were going to go out and lock up anybody that had anything to do with illegal drugs. Whether you were selling it, whether you were using it, whether you were addicted, or whether you were just telling someone where to get it from. And they did. Some are still doing it today. But some of us started thinking in a different direction. Initially, as a commander, someone who used to manage these type of operations, I was wondering who messed up, who dropped the ball, who didn't see what they should have seen, and allowed this to happen. That's what I was thinking. But as time went by, and as the days went by, and the months went by, I started thinking about something else. I started thinking about other cops that I knew who were killed in a similar circumstance, all the way back when I was working undercover. It was rare when I was working undercover, but it did happen. just 2 years after Ed was killed, and I'm still thinking about this. As a matter of fact, I ended up going online looking for other police officers that were thinking the same way. And that's when I stumbled across Leap's brand new website and signed up. But just 2 years after Ed was killed, just a couple years after Ed was killed, we had two Baltimore City police officers killed while I was working there. Killed by drug dealers right on the street. But what really got to me was this case. These look familiar to any of you? You drive through any major city and you'll see these. You drive through the hood, in those areas where we have open air drug markets, you'll see these. These are memorials. You see the teddy bears and the balloons on a pole, kids who have died, caught in a crossfire. That's what you'll see. There's no community that's safe. This community in Baltimore, this is a corner row house where a family used to live. It's the Dawson family. Family of 7 people, mother, father, and 5 kids. On that corner used to be a drug dealer, him and his crew. The mother, Angela, was doing what a good citizen, what we want good citizens to do. We want them to work with the police in ridding communities of drug dealers. And that's what she did. She wasn't afraid of her boys becoming addicted to these drugs that were being sold on that corner. She was afraid of her boys being recruited into that business. Because once recruited into that business, their lifespan goes from here to here. That was her greatest fear, and that's why she did what she did. But as these drug dealers and gangs do, when you mess with their money and their real estate, as she was doing, they send a message. So early one morning, he breaks into their home while they sleep, and he sets it on fire. And he killed the entire family by fire. This isn't just unique to Baltimore. We have these types of murders across this country every day. We have at least 8,000 murders in this country every day that are related to the policies of drug prohibition, not people using drugs. Violence brought me to this place. I had enough of it. And now I even travel outside of this country doing this work. If you're squeamish, you might want to close your eyes on these maps. Mexico. That's someone's son. That's someone's brother. Someone's nephew. Kids who are recruited by the cartel. Into this business. As I got here, I started to learn other things. Number 2, reducing disease. By ending prohibition, that's what we would begin to do. In Portugal, about 12 years ago, Portugal decriminalized the possession of all drugs. Not just marijuana, but all drugs. And since then, this is what's happened. And I'm going to talk about some of those things. HIV infections went down for intravenous drug users, for new cases, by 71%. That's saving lives. That's saving lives. We have some needle exchange programs here in the United States, and in every jurisdiction where we do, we save lives in a similar way. To reduce addiction. You know, at one time, all drugs used to be legal. You know, one time you could buy heroin at the local drugstore for $4.85, you could buy an ounce. Sure could. And it's been reported that the reason they started making drugs illegal was because people were becoming addicted to drugs. Maybe that is part of the reason. But we also know that some of the reasons were about social control. We know that some of the reasons were about economics, corporate America, and so on. But let's just focus on addiction. So back then, 1.3% of the population was addicted to all drugs. And we started down this road with people like Harry Anslinger to make drugs illegal. Back then, when drugs were legal, 1.3% of the population addicted to drugs. 4 decades ago, when Richard Nixon launched the war on drugs, 1.3% of the population addicted to drugs. All drugs, that's what I'm talking about. And now 4 decades later, after all this money being spent, after all these people going to prison, after all this violence in our streets, 1.3% of the population addicted to drugs. You know, when I started working undercover, if I seized a kilo of coke, I was doing some good work back in 1980. I could get promoted. An ounce of heroin was a good seizure. A few pounds of marijuana was a great seizure. But today, this is what we need for a good seizure. Because we have tonnage coming into the country today. Back then, when I would take a kilo of coke off the street, the prices would go up. They would fluctuate, you know, supply and demand, like with gasoline today. And the drug dealers would be scurrying around to re-up to find some new coke somewhere to get to their clients. But today, we take tons off the streets. We will seize a container load of coke at our ports, and the street doesn't even blink. So for 4 decades of all of this work, less drugs aren't coming into the country, more drugs are coming into the country. Basically what I'm saying here, folks, is that you can't stop drugs from coming into the country, especially when you have so many people who want to use drugs. And this is no new phenomenon. This isn't something new. We've always used drugs, ever since we've been on this planet. We use them today, and we're going to be using them tomorrow. How about reducing deaths, overdose deaths? In 1979, that number for us in this country was 28 deaths per 100,000. In 2000, it had increased to 141 per 100,000 users. Again, things did not improve. They did not improve, and they won't improve. Not under these current circumstances. Let's look at Portugal again. Remember, 12 years back, they decriminalized possession of all drugs. A 52% reduction for those using heroin. You know how many lives we would save if we had that kind of success here? In overdose deaths? It'd be tens of thousands of people every year we would save. How about reducing corruption? In this country, we have a lot of police corruption because, again, there's so much money that can be made. We have police planting drugs on people. We arrested troopers who were taking money from drug dealers when they would stop them on the highway. In Baltimore City, we have a case of corruption just about every month or two. On Twitter, a couple times a month, I'll post cases of police corruption all around the country, and I'm never short on material. Never. Never short on material. This is what law enforcement is supposed to be about. Integrity, responsibility, courage, and trust. But that's not where we're at. Don't get me wrong, we have a lot of good cops out here. We really do. But we have too many that head in the other way. lying in court. We have a lot of that by our law enforcement folks. And most of it is surrounds our drug trade. This group of gentlemen here in New York City, some of you may have heard about stop and frisk in New York City and the tens of thousands of arrests that have been made for possession of marijuana, even when they have decriminalization laws on the books for marijuana. But these gentlemen here, one of these detectives was a little low on his arrest numbers. You know, they're from a special unit in New York City, and all they do is go out and work drug crimes. So one was a little low on his numbers. They were going to boot him out of the unit. So his buddies in the unit have an answer. We'll plant drugs on unsuspecting young black kids and young Latino kids. We'll plant drugs on them, give the arrest to you, your numbers go up, and you can stay in the unit. So they sent innocent people to jail so this knucklehead could stay in the unit. And that happens day in and day out. In Mexico, corruption is first about money. The cartel will come to a police officer and offer money because they want you to volunteer your services. That's always best. But if you refuse, the next thing you receive is an envelope, but not full of money, pictures of your family members. So you will do what needs to be done, where your family will start to disappear. To refocus police priorities, I believe that we have become a little misguided as law enforcement. There's so much money available from the feds in the form of grants, burn grants, cops grants, to go after drugs and gangs. Asset forfeiture. Most of what we do today in law enforcement is about drug enforcement. In 1969, before the drug war, we saw 9 out of 10 murders across the country. Today, we only saw 6 out of 10. We had similar numbers for solving rapes. Today, we only saw 4 out of 10. Unsolved are 40% of our murders today. Unsolved are 60% of our rapes and arsons today. 75% of our robberies and 83% of property crimes. You know, I was talking to Allison on the way over here about something I saw coming down Interstate 70 today from St. Louis. It's the town of Wentzville. Is that the name of it? Wentzville? Yeah. So we were driving down, and John's driving, and I look over on the other side of the road, and there's a Wentzville police car stopping someone on Interstate 70. What the hell is that about? Yeah. He belongs in the neighborhood, protecting the people of Wentzville. But that's not something unique. That's every day on our interstate system. Town cops out on the interstate looking for people with money in it. They're not looking for drugs in it. They're looking for the money. So they can seize the money. I'm just saying, folks. Let me stop. I'm sorry. We're just not focused where we need to be focused. That's all we're saying. Protecting people from people is what we're supposed to do. What about improving police relationships? Okay? I meet young people all around the country, and it doesn't matter what community they're from. It's hard to find young people who really like the police today. You know, and it's not just about, people of color who don't like the police because of how they're treated, racial profiling. You know, racial profiling it sits squarely on the foundation of our drug policies. Okay, there's a good book to read. It's by a guy by the name of Joseph Cullum. And the name of the book is called The Black Dragon. It's about the New Jersey State Police in the 1980s, enforcing drug laws on the New Jersey Turnpike. okay, and the methods that they were using. And this reporter from northern New Jersey, Joseph Cullum, wrote the story on how they were enforcing these policies. And the book is about case studies. And here I am, you know, I'm a police officer. I'm a state trooper in the state of Maryland. And when I read that book, my stomach was turning. My stomach was turning. And the New Jersey State Police, who use these heavy-handed tactics of racial profiling and stopping all these vehicles on the New Jersey Turnpike and framing a lot of people, and it's all documented. Other police agencies thought that they knew something great. Other police agencies thought that they had the best strategies and tactics, you know, in the country because they were making all of these arrests. And then the New Jersey State Police taught their strategies and tactics to 41 other police officers and police agencies in 41 other states around the country. If we want to bring police back into community to where we have great relationships, we have to end the drug war so that we're no longer distracted and focused primarily on the drug war, and that we're really going after violent criminals. You know, because it is just a small population of violent criminals that continue to prey on people within our neighborhoods. And if we put forth the effort to really go after those people, then our communities really would be safer. And most of the violence that we have in our communities, folks, is related to the drug war. I just want you to know that also. How about to defund criminal enterprises? The cartel, our local gangs, the Bloods, the Crips, all the neighborhood gangs that pop up and spring up all over the place. This is how they make $322 billion every year globally, by selling this stuff, drugs. And it's an endless supply. We not only have an endless supply, we have endless customers. So we'll continue in some size, shape, or form. That's $255 million in $100 bills. That's in a drug lord's house. Used to be in a drug lord's house. That's only $255 billion. To reach $322 billion, you need a room 1,288 times that size. See, it's well worth it. It's well worth getting into this business. Now, what do they do with that money? Well, I can tell you one thing they do with that money. They buy guns and bullets because they need guns and bullets in order to manage their business. See, they can't manage their business like Anheuser-Busch and Coors. You know, if they have a dispute, they go to court. And they bring in their lawyers and their money and they fight it out. No. When drug dealers have a dispute with another drug dealer or gang, they fight it out, yes, but not in the courtrooms, in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and this is what they use. And they have the money, of course, to buy any weaponry that they want or design. In order for us to end this, we have to end the money. And the only way to end the endless supply of cash is a system of regulation and control, legalization, just like we did with alcohol. What about to improve our economy? You know, when I first started, when many of us first started in law enforcement, if you go back to 1970, when Richard Nixon kicked us off, we were spending about $100 million across this nation for cops and courtrooms and prisons in the drug war. Just a few years later, 2010, we're now at $50 billion, over $50 billion every year. And after 4 decades of this nonsense, $1.3 trillion. And it continues and it continues. It's not cheap to keep somebody housed in prison for as long as we do. Very expensive. And that's only in direct costs. No one has really taken the time and energy to figure out the indirect costs of lost services, of people who aren't paying taxes, of the 2.3 million people in prison who aren't buying cars from the local dealership, who are not shopping at your local business if you happen to be a business owner, who are not paying taxes, who are not buying homes, who are not contributing to the economy, but are being taken care of by our tax dollars. And here's number 10, limiting access to our kids. Let me tell you something. I don't know of one liquor store owner who hires children to sell booze. Do you? Anyone? But you know what? Drug dealers hire children to sell drugs. And they sell drugs to other children in our schools. That's their goal. That's what they do. School kids, and I ask this question all the time, I don't ask it as much as I used to, what's easier to get? You know, what's easier to buy for someone who's under 21 years of age? Marijuana or beer and alcohol? I asked that once in one group of college students, and I would use an example. I'd give $20 to one kid, and not really, I'm not giving my money to anyone. $20 to one kid and 20 to another, and I asked the crowd if I want this kid to go out and find marijuana, and this one to go find me a fifth of Jack Daniels, you know, who would be back first? Yeah, give it the marijuana. The one kid, in one setting, said I don't have to go anywhere. That's why I don't ask that question that much. But it's true. It's true. No regulation and no control. That's why it's so easy. You know, in Portugal again, over the past 12 years, for this age group of 13 to 15-year-olds, drug use across the board decreased by 25%. That's the group that I'm concerned about. Okay? 16 to 19-year-olds decreased by 22%. That's the group that I'm concerned about. Yes, it did go up a little bit for those adults, but they're adults. I'm concerned about the kids. Okay? That's what can happen. Oh, damn, number 11. Mass incarceration. Let's talk about this as real quick and then I am done. This is a chart of countries. Which one is us? Any guess? These are imprisonment rates per 100,000 people. So that long line at the top with the number 1,009 in it, that's the United States, right there. Right there. You got Russia down here with only 628. Now this is a couple of years ago, but there's not much difference today. This is down a little bit, but still, we are the number one leader. We are 5% of the world's population, but yet we have 25% of the world's prisoners in the land of the free, the home of the brave, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's something really wrong here, folks. Really wrong. Either we have the most deviant people in the world, or our policies are screwed up. I'll take number 2. Marijuana arrest. These are the numbers for total drug arrest. In 1970, all the way down here at the bottom, we had less than 500,000 people arrested for all drug arrests in this country. But they quadrupled. By 2005, we had 1.9 million total drug arrests in this country. Of that 1.9 million, 42% were for marijuana crimes. And 89% of that 42% were just for possession of marijuana. We still arrest over 700,000 people every year in this country for marijuana possession. Why? Why? Do you feel much safer after doing that? No, of course not. Because when you send somebody to prison, they're not going to come back to you in a better state. They're going to come back to you worse. All these nonviolent people that we send to prison, they come back to you probably as a member of a gang. Not just a member of a gang who has to put in work. okay, who has to pay their debt for being protected while they were in prison. This is your state. Is that Missouri? How you? Anyway, this is your state. This is the ACLU's national report that they did released back in June. And I just wanted to share this to you real quick. For marijuana arrest. So, in 2010, 49 million plus spent for marijuana arrests. And when you look at all drug arrests in 2010, more than half were for marijuana. That's why you need to work on your marijuana legislation here, folks. You need to move to tax and regulate, legalize marijuana so you can end this nonsense. And this is just real quick. For 100,000 white males in this country, and this is from 2008, you know, the number was 456 for 100,000 incarcerated white males. That's the number from apartheid in South Africa for you folks who have done some history. 1993, 851 black males incarcerated in South Africa. And we placed sanctions upon South Africa. I mean, we were really upset about what they were doing in South Africa. We were really mad about that. But in this country, in 2008, we imprisoned 3,059 black males in that. We have some great disparity issues with our drug policies in this country. That's another thing we really have to get a handle on. 1 in 57, that's the number of white children who have a parent or two in prison. 1 in 57. 1 in 9. You know what the next phrase is? Black children with a parent in prison. And this is my end. This is a quote from a guy by the name of August Balmer. August Balmer was the chief of police in Berkeley, California at one time back in the 1920s. He eventually became the president for the California Chiefs of Police, and then he went on to become the president for the International Chiefs of Police Association. The International Chiefs of Police Association today are one of our biggest headaches. They're opposing the changes that we are trying to make. They're even pushing back against the Department of Justice for coming forward and saying, you know what, we're going to allow Colorado and Washington State to move forward with their new marijuana policy. And they're pushing back against that. And this is what August Balmer said. Now, he is the father of policing here in the United States, okay? You got to listen to your dad. Stringent laws, vigorous prosecution and imprisonment of addicts and peddlers have proved not only useless and enormously expensive as means of correcting this evil, but they are also unjustifiably and unbelievably cruel in their application to the unfortunate drug victims. Repression has driven this vice underground and produced the narcotic smugglers and supply agents who have grown wealthy out of this evil practice and who by devious methods have stimulated traffic in drugs. Finally, and not the least of the evils associated with repression, the helpless addict has been forced to resort to crime in order to get money for the drug, which is absolutely indispensable for his comfortable existence. If only our law enforcement folks would have listened to their daddy back in the 1920s and 1930s, we wouldn't be in this place today. Thank you, folks.
Hi, my name is Joel Lauderdale. I'm the president of Student for Sensible Drug Policy. We work with normal, to reform drug laws here in Missouri and hopefully in America in the long run. So that's the goal. Anyway, thanks to Neil Franklin for speaking and everybody for attending. Another round of applause for Neil Franklin. So actually, I have an attendance sheet to pass around. Hopefully, if anybody can sign it, that would be good. We'll send you emails about further updates related to drug reform in the state of Missouri and abroad. And so that would be really good. I actually also have, just for fun, if anybody wants before they leave, we have tons of samples of hemp, actually edible. That's another thing that we're trying to support because banning hemp is pretty much as irrational as banning marijuana. So anyway, I don't want to keep talking because you guys can come here and listen to me. So I'm going to keep it short. And please welcome the chief author and campaign leader of Washington's Act 502 campaign that legalized and regulated marijuana, Allison Holcomb.
Hey, can you do me a favor? If you're able to stand up, can you stand up? Stretch it out. And while you're standing up, think about your number one personal reason for wanting to end marijuana prohibition. Is it the violence? Is it the racism? Is it this your God-given right to get high every now and then? Is it Ed Totley? Is it the Dawson family? Is it the stuff that's happening here in Missouri? What is it? So somebody shout out your number one reason. Come on.
I want to get high.
You want to get high? Close, look over here.
Live
So you can live regular, not be a criminal anymore, not be thought of as a criminal. Not be yeah, and have relief, medical relief.
Does the government tell me whether I can get high or not?
Yep. Waste of money, racism, Crohn's disease, great.
Violent crime.
All right, violent crime. Sorry, Neil always gets me.
Sorry.
No, it's true. I'll tell you my personal reason for marijuana law reform specifically. Stretch a little bit. Don't sit down yet. Stretch just up. I was a criminal defense attorney for a little over a decade before going to work for the ACLU of Washington in 2006. I represented a patient and the patient's husband. The patient was growing for herself and growing from a man who had terminal illness that made it impossible for him to keep food down. And they lived with their teenage son in a double-wide trailer out in the peninsula in Washington. And just before dawn, keep stretching, a task force, interlocal drug task force, took down the door of their double-wide trailer with a battering ram, came in black uniforms, semi-automatic weapons, and their teenage son, thinking that they were being arrested, ran out of his room and started shouting at these police officers. And he was quickly ordered to the floor with guns pointed at his head. And his parents came out of their room. And I wasn't there, but as the father is sitting across my desk from me in my law office and telling me the story, he starts crying, tearing up. And he just looked at me and said, "Allison, you don't know what it's like to be a father who is looking at their son with guns to his head, thinking that he's going to die, and not be able to do anything to stop it from happening." That is my personal passion for why I fight so hard to end the war on marijuana. I share that with you because I want you to crystallize your reason in your mind, because much of my presentation is going to be about how you go about accomplishing your goal rather than why you want to accomplish your goal. We're going to talk about your passion and politics and public education, how those three interact together when they come into tension. So now, before you sit down, on the count of three, think of a word in your head that crystallizes for you why you're going to be a warrior to end marijuana prohibition, and you're going to shout it out. Yes, all of you. On the count of three, and then I'll let you sit down and get on this. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Awesome. All right, take a seat. Thank you all for entertaining me. I appreciate it. All right, let's get the PowerPoint. Does this look different up there? All right. As I said, we're going to talk about your passion, politics, and public education. Sorry, I want to run to do this one. All right. So November 6, 2012 was super exciting. That was the night when we exceeded our expectations, and Initiative 502 was passed by 1.7 million voters in Washington State, 56% of the vote. It was an incredible evening. But why were we doing it? Neil's talked to you a little bit about mass incarceration in this country, and this is another way of visualizing what the war on drugs has done to the land of the free and the brave. This image is people incarcerated in our federal prisons, the dark blue, state prisons, medium blue, jails, light blue, for drug law violations. It includes marijuana, it's not exclusive to marijuana, but look what happened from 1972 to roughly now. The mass incarceration that Neil was talking about is a war on drugs, it's a war on people. That's what's been driving the prison population in this country. Here's what the state of Washington looked like for marijuana possession arrests. These are misdemeanor possession arrests. Back in the late 80s, 24,000 a year. By the late 2000s, almost 68,000 a year. And these arrests were racially disproportionate. We saw the statistics from Missouri. In Washington, an African American is 3 times as likely to be arrested, 3 times as likely to be charged, and 3 times as likely to be convicted for marijuana possession, despite the fact that white Washingtonians use marijuana at a slightly higher rate. Paul Butler is a former U.S. attorney who worked in the courts in Washington, D.C., prosecuting cases there. U.S. attorneys work in essentially what would be the city and state courts for us, because it's Washington, D.C., it's the national capital, so it's all federal law. He wrote a great book that I recommend you read. It's actually a very easy read. He tells his own personal story of having been arrested and pushed into the very system that he was racking up a lot of points in, as he describes it, really playing the game well and succeeding. And he talks about what Neil touched on a little bit, that this obsession with mass incarceration not only has a racial element to it, but it's also produced counterintuitive results. We are actually less free and less safe today than we were back in the 1970s. If you look at the fact that people that go into the criminal justice system not only aren't getting a great education and coming out with a lot of great job skills to help them return to